His name was Elias Monroe. When he stepped onto the stage of his megachurch, the entire congregation fell silent. Charismatic, wealthy, with a voice like thunder that filled every corner of the room, he carried an aura no one could resist. People whispered about the energy around him, something intangible, yet undeniable, as if the man himself radiated divine power. To millions, Elias was larger than life. But Elias Monroe hadn't always been this figure of fame and reverence. Years before the lights, the cameras, and the endless applause, he had been just another young theology graduate, full of passion but weighed down by failure. His first ministry was small and fragile, a struggling church where pews sat empty no matter how hard he worked. Baptisms failed to happen. Donations barely covered the lights. Week after week, he poured his soul into sermons, his voice burning with conviction, only to see rows of vacant seats staring back. Desperation set in. He tried everything: creative outreach programs, late-night prayer sessions, new ways of delivering the same timeless message. Still, nothing changed. Frustration gnawed at him, and doubt whispered in the silence of the sanctuary. Was he truly called to this path, or had he mistaken his own ambition for God's voice? It was in that season of quiet defeat that Elias met Pastor Darius Cole. Cole was a senior leader of one of the nation's most powerful megachurches, known for mentoring ambitious young pastors. His advice always carried weight, and always came with a price. He studied Elias one evening, noting the fire in his eyes, the hunger beneath his frustration. Then he leaned in close. "You want fortune and fame," Cole said softly. "I can give it to you, but remember this: every blessing has a cost." Elias didn't pause to ask what the cost might be. He was desperate, driven, blind to warning. The vision of a full church, a respected ministry, and his name in the mouths of thousands outweighed hesitation. He agreed in an instant. The cost, when it came, was unthinkable. His own mother, the woman who had been his anchor, his greatest source of strength, was gone. Her death shattered him, but in the same breath, something changed. His words suddenly commanded attention. His prayers seemed charged with power. People began to flock to him as though drawn by an unseen force. Membership grew, donations poured in, baptisms multiplied. Where there had once been empty pews, there was now standing room only. Cameras appeared, then networks, then crowds so large they spilled into parking lots. And yet beneath the applause, guilt coiled in his chest like smoke. Elias had achieved everything he'd dreamed of, but the foundation of his success was laid on a shadow no one else could see. He smiled for the cameras, draped in fine suits, adored by strangers, yet in his quiet moments, he felt the haunting truth. The price had already been paid. But what Elias didn't yet know was that the cost wasn't over. His rise was only beginning, fueled by a strange gift that would bind him to powers far darker than he imagined. In the years that followed, Elias Monroe became impossible to ignore. The small, struggling church that once echoed with empty pews had transformed into a sprawling megachurch that drew thousands each week. Television crews set up cameras at every sermon. Social media overflowed with clips of his voice, booming, commanding, magnetic. To the world, he was not just a pastor, he was a phenomenon. The secret of his rise gleamed faintly on his right hand, a green ring that seemed almost alive. To most, it was nothing more than jewelry, but those who caught it at the right angle swore it shimmered like emerald fire, pulsing in time with Elias's words. Few dared to ask about it, and those who did never received a straight answer. Elias had been warned the ring must never come off. It was not an ornament, but a conduit, the source of his irresistible power. At first, Mariah, his wife, couldn't hide her wonder. Their lives had transformed overnight. "Elias, how did all this happen so fast?" she asked one evening, staring at the new car parked outside their home, the expensive furniture filling their living room. Her voice was soft, tinged with awe and unease. "The money, the attention, the way people look at you, it doesn't feel natural." He kissed her forehead, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's God's favor. That's all it is." Mariah wanted to believe him. She wanted to silence the nagging doubts that gnawed at her every time the ring caught the light. Luxury and recognition had a way of softening conviction, and soon she learned to smile while suppressing her unease. It was easier to embrace complicity than to confront the truth. Meanwhile, Elias's powers grew. The congregation marveled at his seemingly divine ability. Families who had been drowning in debt suddenly testified about financial breakthroughs. Relatives once bedridden with sickness claimed miraculous recoveries. Broken marriages found restoration. Every week brought fresh stories of transformation, and every week the crowd grew larger. And yet, when the lights dimmed and the sanctuary emptied, shadows flickered across the walls of his office. A faint hum pulsed from the ring as though it breathed with him. Elias sometimes caught himself staring at it in silence, aware, deep down, that its power was not free. But the roar of adoration, the endless invitations, and the intoxicating sense of being needed drowned out those quiet warnings. The megachurch expanded. Donations poured in. His name became synonymous with miracles. To the world, Elias Monroe was untouchable. But the cracks had already begun. Some members stumbled out of services, feeling drained, even ill. A wealthy businessman collapsed during a sermon. A few whispered nervously in the corners, "Miracles always have a cost." No one dared speak too loudly against the man who seemed closer to God than anyone alive. Unseen by the cheering crowds, the ring's influence grew stronger, binding Elias tighter with every passing day. And then the cost would show itself, not in strangers, but in the people closest to him. The church pulsed with an energy that felt almost otherworldly. Crowds spilled out of the sanctuary doors. Journalists wrote breathless articles about modern miracles, and even rival pastors traveled from across the country just to witness Elias in action. His voice, commanding, thunderous, carried the weight of authority that bent even the most skeptical hearts. But beneath the grandeur, shadows stretched longer. It began quietly. After one Sunday service, a wealthy businessman collapsed in the parking lot, gasping for air. Another week, a long-time choir member was struck with a fever no doctor could explain. The congregation whispered in private, too afraid to voice their doubts aloud. Hadn't they all felt strange exhaustion after service? Hadn't someone's aunt grown sick right after her healing testimony? When the murmurs grew too loud, Elias silenced them with scripture. Brothers and sisters, God tests us in ways we cannot understand. Remain anchored in faith, for trials are the soil where miracles take root. His voice thundered across the sanctuary, and the crowd roared with renewed conviction. The doubters were drowned out by the faithful, but the cost was creeping closer to home. Leah, his daughter, once radiant and full of laughter, grew pale and listless. Faint blotches spread across her skin. At night, Mariah sat by her bedside, whispering prayers and clutching Leah's frail hand. "Elias," she pleaded one evening, her eyes wet with tears. "Something's wrong. She's getting worse. You have to see it." Elias turned away, jaw tight. "It's just a trial. God is working through us." "Is it God?" Mariah whispered, her gaze shifting to the ring on his hand. "Or that thing you wear?" Her words struck him like a blade, but he couldn't let doubt show. On stage, he was the unshakable man of God. To falter would be to unravel everything he had built. Behind the scenes, the truth was darker than anyone guessed. Not every miracle was real. Some healings were staged, with actors coached to play the crippled or the broken. The spectacle of suffering and the promise of deliverance was the fuel that kept the congregation pouring in. And whether staged or real, the ring demanded payment. The more people ached, the more his fame soared. Elias told himself it was worth it, that lives were being touched, even if the price was hidden. But guilt gnawed at him, in the quiet hours, whispering reminders of the pact he had sealed. And still, the crowds came. Families mourned their sick in silence, yet returned week after week, clinging to the hope of salvation. The church had become a beacon for the desperate, a sanctuary for those willing to sacrifice anything for a chance at deliverance. At the center of it all stood Elias, cloaked in power, his green ring gleaming like a heartbeat of something far older and far darker than faith. But soon, the sickness would spread beyond the congregation, and Elias would be forced to confront a terrifying truth. The very empire he built was feeding on the lives of those he loved most. The tragedies did not relent. Leah's condition worsened with every passing day. Doctors tried everything, but nothing slowed the decline. Her once bright eyes dulled, her laughter silenced. One night, as Elias sat at her bedside, Leah's small fingers curled weakly around his. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Daddy, will I make it?" The words shattered him. His throat closed. His chest ached, but he could not bring himself to answer. He only held her tighter, knowing the truth. She wouldn't. Days later, Leah's frail body gave out. The nursery was left in a silence so complete it rang in Elias's ears. He held her lifeless hand in the dim light, a pit hollowing out inside him. For the first time, he thought of slipping the green ring off his finger, ending both the power and the curse. That night, Mariah confronted him, her face streaked with tears. "Elias, I can't do this anymore. Look at our daughter." Her voice cracked as grief consumed her. "Look at them all. How many more must suffer before you stop?" He clenched his fists, the ring cutting into his skin. For a moment, he wavered. He wanted to quit, to walk away, to go back to the quiet, anonymous life they once had. But just as resolve flickered, the phone rang. A state official, one of the most powerful in the country, invited him to headline a televised event. The lure of prestige, recognition, and influence drowned out the guilt. Elias glanced at the ring and swallowed his hesitation. He could not refuse. Soon after, he was back on stage, basking in applause. Cameras flashed, people wept, and testimonies poured in. But behind the curtain, the suffering multiplied. More congregants fell mysteriously ill. Families slipped into financial ruin. Death notices trickled in. Yet paradoxically, the tragedies only seemed to swell attendance. Desperation filled the pews. If miracles were possible, surely they were worth any cost. Mariah, broken by grief, watched the cycle with growing horror. Elias's sermons rang louder, more fervent, his voice booming with authority. But when the lights dimmed and the sanctuary emptied, he would sit in silence, his chest heavy with shadows. Every cry, every coffin, every whispered doubt pressed against him. Still, he slipped the ring back on day after day, unable to tear himself away from its hold. Publicly, Elias Munro was flawless, a man of divine power, celebrated and untouchable. Privately, he was unraveling, haunted by the death of his little girl. The ring glimmered endlessly, a reminder of everything he had gained and everything he had lost. And as the congregation continued to collapse beneath the weight of his miracles, Mariah began to ask herself a dangerous question, one that Elias refused to face. If he would not abandon the ring, who or what would ever make him let it go? Elias's life had become a whirlwind of wealth, influence, and indulgence. Private jets whisked him across continents, each destination flaunting his power. Exotic beaches, lavish resorts, and glittering parties surrounded him, and women laughed at his charm. Yet beneath the glamour, the loss of Leah and the weight of his choices pressed down like a relentless tide. Mariah, broken after Leah's death, could no longer bear the horrors surrounding them. Night after night, she watched the congregation suffer silently. Families struck by illness, whispered curses, prayers unanswered. She begged Elias to slow down, to consider the cost of their meteoric rise. But he dismissed her concerns, chasing the allure of power and prestige. Finally, terrified and exhausted, Mariah packed her bags and left the state, seeking distance from the chaos that had stolen their daughter. The congregation murmured about her sudden disappearance, and Elias assured them she needed time to heal from the heartbreak. But even he knew the truth. Her departure was permanent. Despite her absence, Elias continued to indulge himself, entertaining influential figures, traveling to private islands, and savoring the adoration of the world. Yet at night, the memories haunted him. Dreams of Leah's tiny hand, her fragile voice asking, "Daddy, will I make it?" echoed in his mind. Her question, never answered, tore at him relentlessly. His mother's pleading eyes, Mariah's fearful gaze, the lives lost to the green ring, they all converged in relentless torment. One evening, the pastor, who had first introduced Elias to the green ring, appeared unexpectedly, a shadowed figure whispering threats. "Elias, your wife knows too much. Either she returns to the fold or she disappears. If she exposes us, everything collapses." Within days, Mariah vanished under strange and mysterious circumstances. No trace remained, no cries for help, no notes, just absence. Elias's nights grew longer, pills and sedatives barely quieting the endless visions of Leah, his wife, and his mother, all silently accusing him. Every scream, every whispered lament from the suffering congregation reminded him of the cost of the ring's power. Yet the empire continued to grow. Crowds swelled. Miracles, real or imagined, drew people from far and wide, and the world admired him. But cracks were forming, and in the shadows, someone new was watching. Someone who would not be deterred by his fame, fortune, or the horrors he had caused. The first move of this unseen adversary had already begun, and Elias would not see it coming. Even as Elias's fame soared to unimaginable heights, a new presence began moving quietly within the shadows of his empire. Naomi, a striking young woman with a voice that could stir souls, had grown up in the church. She was the choir's lead singer, adored for her talent and devotion. But her reasons went far deeper than performance. Years ago, Naomi's mother had been miraculously healed of diabetes during one of Elias's sermons. The congregation celebrated the miracle, yet not long after, her health relapsed far worse than before, leaving Naomi with a simmering desire to uncover the truth behind the blessings and the hidden suffering. Naomi's fascination with Elias's green ring grew over the years, observing how he wore it more faithfully than his Bible. It radiated power, commanding awe and fear in equal measure. Congregants whispered of miracles and sudden deaths, but most ignored the darker pattern. Only a few, like Naomi, suspected there was more lurking behind Elias's sermons, but none could yet imagine the full cost. As the choir rehearsed for Sunday services, Naomi's voice soared, mesmerizing the congregation. And Elias himself. From her position close to the pastor, she observed his every move, how he wielded the green ring with reverence, how he indulged in luxury while drowning in pills, and how the horrors of his family's suffering haunted him, despite all the power. Naomi knew the ring was the key. Every sermon, every miracle performed, reminded her of the lives lost, the families broken, and the shadowed toll of Elias's rise. Her plan to confront him would be neither simple nor safe, yet her resolve burned hotter than fear. As the music filled the grand sanctuary, she silently vowed to expose the source of the suffering. Elias, oblivious to the storm quietly forming within his own church, continued to preach with a voice that had once captivated the nation. But the first cracks were forming, and Naomi was poised to widen them. And when she finally moved, Elias would have no idea the reckoning was already at his doorstep. Elias had grown used to admiration and devotion, but Naomi was different. Her beauty, talent, and the quiet confidence she carried drew him in, a lure he could not resist. Weeks of careful trust-building had set the stage. Now she was ready to test boundaries he couldn't refuse. "Pastor Elias," Naomi whispered, leaning close, her voice velvety and deliberate. "I need some time with you, just the two of us." Elias felt the pull immediately. They arranged a private meeting at a dimly lit hotel room, charged with a subtle tension he could not ignore. Naomi poured him a drink, their hands brushing, her gaze holding him captive. As he lifted the glass, he felt a pang of warmth, and then a creeping drowsiness. Naomi's hand had discreetly slipped in a pill. He sank into a deep, unresisting sleep, his last conscious thoughts a mix of confusion and desire. When Elias awoke, the green ring was gone. Naomi had removed it, carrying it to the cemetery where his mother and his daughter Leah had been laid to rest. He remembered Leah's frail voice, asking with trembling eyes, "Daddy, will I make it?" And the heartache of knowing she would not. Now, the ring rested deep in the soil, buried as solemn prayers were whispered over it. A strange stillness fell over the city, as if the world itself sensed the end of Elias's reign. His sermons lacked the power they once held. Slowly, parishioners recovered their health and fortunes. The once packed sanctuary emptied, leaving Elias alone in the echo of his fading influence. Desperate, he grasped at luxuries, attempted control, and swallowed pills to quiet the relentless nightmares. But without the ring, all was meaningless. Visions of his mother, Mariah, and Leah haunted him relentlessly, a constant reminder of the lives he had manipulated and the price he had paid. Naomi, having executed her plan with precision, quietly departed. Elias, stripped of wealth, power, and influence, became a cautionary tale, a man who had sought godlike authority and lost everything. He now spends his days in bars, unrecognizable, drinking his torment out, haunted by memories of all he could never undo.